Thank you for watching On Call for All Kids. Today we'll be talking about returning to sports during the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll be going over if masks should be worn on the field, how to minimize the risk of getting COVID-19, and advice on if returning to organized sports is right for your family. I'm joined by Dr. Patrick Molaroni. He is the medical director of the sports medicine program at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. And it is great to see you, Dr. Molaroni. How are you?
Hi, Ashley. I'm doing great. Thanks.
So, fall sports is getting ready to be in full swing. Exciting time. Families are looking forward to this, but it's important that we understand the safety precautions that should be put in place and the risks involved as well. So, I'm glad we can talk about that today. Let's first talk about masks. Should athletes be wearing masks?
I think that's something that you have to look at each individual sport. If we look at the way Major League Baseball has handled the pandemic, the athletes are out on the field and they don't have masks on, but they're maintaining social distancing. But then when they go back into the dugout, many of them are putting their masks back on and they're making sure not to stand shoulder to shoulder and providing that physical distancing. Now, you have to combat that with the Florida heat. There are some outdoor sports where it's going to be very difficult to be wearing masks, and some sports where I suggest that you don't wear masks. But in that situation, children need to be physically distanced. They need to be staying at least 6 feet apart, and that is very important. The second thing is for coaches. A lot of coaches see their athletes on the field and they see that they're not wearing masks, so then the coaches take down their masks, and that shouldn't be happening. When we look at what's going on with the NFL, coaches are being fined and being reprimanded by the NFL for not wearing masks. And the truth is that all coaches should be out there in masks. Now, if the coach needs to instruct and they need to use a loud voice where they don't feel like they'll be heard, then you absolutely need to step away from those athletes, maintaining more than 6 feet of distance so that you can have that message heard. But the best thing to do is just to keep a mask on if you're coaching.
Now, with a lot of these kids, these players on the fields not wearing their masks, what can coaches do to keep the entire team safe?
Well, the first thing is always stressing that athletes should not come to the field, should not play in practices or games if they're ill. If they're having any symptoms, then they should just stay home. The second thing is that physical distancing. We need to make sure that we take the opportunity to physical distance as much as possible. So when athletes are in line getting ready to do a drill, they should be at least 6 feet apart. If there's a time where the athletes are taking a knee for like instruction or something like that, again, making sure that they're staying spaced out. We look at what some organizations have done to help increase that spacing, like high school football. Normally, there's a rule in high school football that you need to stay between the 30-yard lines. So 30-yard lines on each side, or stay 40 yards along the sidelines. But now that has been relaxed so that athletes can stay between the 10-yard lines, giving them 80 yards so that they can spread out. So that if you're on the sidelines and you just came off and you're not in a mask, you're able to social distance. But when you are on the sidelines, you should probably have your mask on.
Now, a lot of sports involve equipment. Is it okay for these players to be sharing equipment?
Well, it's probably not a good idea to be sharing equipment. But when I say that, there are definitely some sports where you obviously have to share equipment, like football or basketball, where you're passing the ball back and forth. So a good idea is to have athletes sanitize their hands before they go out on the field and then sanitize their hands when the practice is over. In other situations, you shouldn't be sharing equipment, like baseball bats. There should be enough bats for each player to have one. And then weight training. If you're going to be in the weight room, you should be sanitizing the equipment, regardless if there's a COVID pandemic or not. But you want to sanitize that equipment before you use it.
And how about water bottles? Probably not a good idea to share that either.
Right. We shouldn't have group water bottles. Every athlete should show up at the field with their own water bottle. And if they should happen to finish all the water in that water bottle and need more, then you should designate a coach or a member of the staff who's going to sanitize their hand and actually hold the nozzle on whatever you're going to use to give the children water, where the child holds their own bottle, takes their own cap off, and then you end up with basically a touchless system where the coach is pushing the button and the child is filling up that water without that close interaction.
I know some parents are just struggling to decide whether or not they should send their kids back to play sports. What do you suggest? What do you tell these parents?
Well, this is an individual family decision. And I think that if you follow the protocols, some families are feeling that it's safe to go out and play sports. But you have to look at what's going on in your community and what's going on around us with regards to the pandemic and how your community is doing. And then you also have to look at your individual family. There are some families that probably shouldn't be going back to sports right now. If you live with an elderly grandparent, or if the child actually lives with somebody who has a serious medical illness, this may be the season to sit out, because playing sports and getting out in groups like this in contact sports does increase your risk of being close to other people and then potentially catching COVID. So you need to look at that on a family basis. That being said, if you do make the decision that you're not going to let your children play sports or contact sports, you still need to keep them active. We need to remember that physical activity is really important for children for both their mental and physical well-being. And getting out there as a family and being together and exercising is definitely a good thing.
All right, Dr. Mulroney, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about returning to sports. We hope that if your family is returning to the fields this season, that you all stay safe out there. And thank you all for watching today. If you have a topic idea you would like us to look into, you could comment below right here on this video. You can also check out our website. It's hopkinsallchildrens.org/coronavirus. And you'll find many more resources there as well on the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.